Welcome to our world. Won't you come on in? Waiting just for you. Welcome to our world.
Welcome to Tuesday, everyone.
Welcome,
Great. Okay.
everyone.
I am super excited about this episode because this wasn't my idea, as you can probably gather from what the subject is. That being said, what?
Okay. No, I just have a question before you get started.
Raising your hand over there.
Well, I
What?
raised my hand because I didn't want to interrupt. I mean, we should at least tell everyone that we are in our new
Oh, you're
recording
right.
studio.
You're right. Well, that's kind of a lie. We're in the same room, but
I just got a new desk, but it's like...
it's not a desk. It is a conference table.
No, it's,
I think we
it's a
should clarify.
It's a standing desk, but
Why
it's,
aren't we
it's
standing?
large. We could, well, because I'm lazy.
Oh,
My legs will get sore.
great.
I don't know. I'll probably stand eventually when I have to go to the bathroom. That'll be it. I won't go to the bathroom here. I mean, I'll go in the bath. I'll have to stand up to walk to the bathroom. Actually, my chair has wheels. I could wheel myself in and just like lift myself off onto
I have a better idea for you.
Is it better to say commode or
No,
toilet?
I
Does
have
commode sound less like, I don't know.
I don't like anything that I hear coming from your
Okay.
mouth, so it doesn't matter what the word is.
Okay.
I have a better idea for you. And I can't believe that I'm the one that came up with this and that you did not in that
Go ahead.
time span. And I also can't believe this is how we're starting our Tuesday episode, but here we go.
Go ahead.
It's a standing desk. Desk. You raise the desk. You put a urinal underneath.
Why did I not think of that? What a great idea. I could put it in the corner so that I turn away. So it's like, you won't even know other than the trickling sound that you'll hear.
Okay, I hate it here.
Okay, that's much better than my catheter idea.
That's not, you didn't even, okay, all right.
I know, I didn't want to say
Anyway,
that.
I hope none of you are eating as you're listening to this. I should have given you a trigger warning.
Yep.
You should just know not to eat while you're listening to this podcast at this point.
You never know what we're going to say.
Jim, what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk some more about the bathroom sponge.
No.
Okay, no, that's not going to be it. We're going to talk about probably everyone's favorite subject. Tariffs.
Great.
Okay. Let's kick it off.
I want to clarify. I will kick it off, and I'm sure you have a lot of things to say.
Well, should you kick it off or should I kick it off?
I'm going to kick it off with the actual definition of what a tariff is so that we're all on the same page.
Okay.
And then you go ahead and
then
give
I'll say
your opinion on a lot
I'll
of
say my
things.
uninformed opinion.
Exactly.
And
then I'll go back to facts, and it'll be super fun. Okay? So what is a tariff, you ask? A tariff is a tax imposed on goods that are imported into a country from another country. These taxes are typically charged as a percentage of the product's value. Importers are generally responsible for paying the tariff to the government of the importing country. Over to you, Jim.
Okay. So the reason we're talking about this is because it's, the big thing in the news, like before Trump got elected, he was like, and still he says how tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I never had a really strong opinion on tariffs, but in general, I was more like open trade, free trade, kind of like, okay, if we can get something cheaper from China, why wouldn't we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And if people in this country, don't want to work for the wages that they're paying in China, and China can produce these goods more cheaply, then that's the way it is. It's kind of like survival of the fittest or free market, right? Whoever can make the better product and make it the cheapest wins. But that said, I can understand the other argument too, right? And this is a fact, we've been running huge trade deficits for a long time. And because I am relatively old now, I mean, it's relatively speaking, to Nana, I'm still very young, right?
Sure. To me, you're old. Okay.
To centurions. Wait, Roman centurions?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm still young. But anyway, getting sidetracked here.
Shocking.
What was I saying?
I don't know.
That's how you can tell I'm old, because I can't remember what I was talking about like 15 seconds ago. Well, now it's 20.
That you said you used to be a huge proponent of free trade, and now you understand the argument for tariffs.
Well, right, because...
Which is what?
Well, because of the fact that we have a huge trade deficit.
Sure.
A huge trade deficit. We don't make anything in this country anymore. Like, more and more, it's like we buy everything. And because we're buying everything, it's no different than if, you have a house and and you start with a bunch of money, but you just keep spending it. And you gradually get to a point where, like, you run out of money, and all of a sudden you had all this power, and now eventually you don't have the power because somebody else has the money, because they've been working hard and you've been just sort of, I don't want to say being lazy, but whatever. So anyway, I'm not a big fan of tariffs, put it that way. Whether there should be any tariffs at all or not, I guess that's up for debate. I would like to hear your informed opinion, your educated opinion on this.
Well, Jim, thank you for asking. I have so many thoughts about this. It's insane. And I don't know where to start. I'm overwhelmed, honestly. Okay.
You should tell everyone your background and why you may have mentioned this in the
economics.
past.
Great. I have a degree in economics.
Okay.
So and I want to clarify, which maybe I said this already the last time that I talked about this. It's because I'm genuinely interested in it, not because I felt like I needed to get a degree in something, but like...
You found it interesting,
yes.
Bottom line.
In high school, there was like this competition. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but I randomly picked economics as the thing that I would compete in. And I wound up getting first after studying for like a week. And so after that, I just was super interested in economics because... I mean, micro, macro, it affects literally everything that you do, and just the intricacies of economies and how they're all, there's just so much. I love economics, okay? So my follow-up question to you is, how do you feel about the comment that a tariff is a tax on the importing country?
Well, I think, like so many of these things, I think it's misleading, right? I think when, say, Trump or somebody that supports what he's doing says that, it's misleading. But the flip side is I also think it's misleading if you say just it's a tax on the American people. I think it's somewhere in between. And the reason I say that is, like you said before, it's paid by the importer, right?
Sure.
But the thing is, the importer and the manufacturer still have to compete. So if all of a sudden the cost to the consumer in the United States, for instance, becomes so high that all of a sudden that Temu stuff, that crap that people say are buying, some of it may be good, I don't know, becomes like less attractive, then the manufacturer or the importer probably will eat a little bit of the cost of the tariff. So yeah, it's definitely not just paid. It's definitely not just paid by the manufacturer. That's for sure. But it's not completely paid. Like if it's 10% tariff, it's probably going to vary. Probably in some cases, the manufacturer will eat the cost. In some cases, the consumer will wind up paying the entire amount.
Yeah, I would say it varies. And I don't want to, without going company by company or anything like that, I would say in general with tariffs, in many cases, the business winds up taking the hit in many cases. Up to a certain point. Up to a certain point, obviously. If the tariff is too high, they're forced to push, some of that onto consumers.
Right.
I do think saying, a tariff is a tax on the American people is it is misleading in the fact that it's like, oh, great, we're tariffs. That means I'm going to pay more for this, because you're right. That's not necessarily what it means. However, that being said, I think tariffs can be a useful tool for creating new trading patterns and partnerships. I do not think tariffs themselves are inherently good. I think kind of the way it seems maybe that Donald Trump went about it was laying out all these tariffs, and we'll see how this continues to go, but pretty much the reaction from the rest of the world being like, well, we don't want those tariffs on our goods, so let's maybe try to come to an agreement so that that's not where we're landing. I think that's when more of the threat of tariffs is useful.
Right.
I do not like tariffs themselves because there's one thing in this world that is very important to me. Do you know what that is? Besides the kittens and besides the Philadelphia Phillies?
Cheap prices on Amazon.
What do I love in all aspects of my life?
Sleep?
You're not wrong. No, my one true love in this world is efficiency. I love efficiency, and there are always ways to make processes and systems more efficient, and I wish people cared more about that stuff. I do not like tariffs because they are inefficient from an economic standpoint. Do you know why?
I could see where it creates another kind of step, another line item. But as far, I don't know. No, I don't know exactly what you're saying.
This is going to be difficult to explain to
the layman such as I.
It's going to be difficult to explain without a chart of sorts. And so for you, I'm not actually going to, I could show you an actual chart.
It's because I'm a simpleton, isn't it?
No, I'm more just kind of going to like demonstrate with my hands as most professionals do. But if you
I'm sure, and that will be very helpful to those listening.
I know. If you are listening and you don't understand what I'm saying and you care about what I'm saying, then the thing that I want you to look up, it's called dead weight loss in tariffs. Have you heard of this?
No, but it would also they could also watch the broadcast on our YouTube channel.
Great. Not yet. We're not there yet because Jim isn't doing that.
Well, the studio's not quite where it needs to be.
Anyway, it's called dead weight loss in tariffs. And I think, so you haven't heard of this before, right?
No, I haven't.
So that annoys me because you obviously listen to a lot of things about like a lot of news things. You watch a lot of news shows. You've heard plenty of different news stations talk about tariffs and whether they're good or bad or all this stuff. So the fact that you specifically do not know what dead weight loss is regarding tariffs is mind-blowing. Yeah. Because that means that
never comes up.
Nobody's doing their job and explaining.
And I don't want to get sidetracked, but pretty much every one of these news stations, they do not. It's not news, it's opinion, right?
Yes.
So they start with their agenda and then they create the story from there. But anyway, so there's no reason for them to bring that up.
And I want to make it clear, if you're looking at this as an argument of the right versus the left, like Donald Trump supporters versus whoever else, left-wing politicians and all that, this is a good argument against tariffs for the other side. So it annoys me that they're not using facts and that they're just sticking with the emotional abuse that they always tend to use or whatever. So pretty much what happens when you've seen a supply and demand model curve. Yeah. Hold on. Yep. Maybe I'll just click on this.
Yeah,
because I feel like this is going to be easier.
So the supply and the demand and the cost but you can't.
No, I know, but
you don't need to show me.
Okay, well then let me just explain it without showing you. You guys can look up a graph, and they're pretty intuitive.
Because it's probably better this way. Because if there's something while you're explaining it, I don't understand. I'm going to ask, which will help the listeners.
When you have a supply and demand curve and like a graph, and where they intersect is pretty much like the price and the amount that you want it to be at, and all that stuff, right? Okay. So if you're looking on the demand curve, anything above that line is going to be a surplus, right? For the consumer,
right?
Because the line,
which would create downward pressure on the price.
Anything that's below that, anything that's below that is going to be a surplus for the producer. Okay,
like a surplus of consumers.
No, just like a. We don't have to. Don't think too hard about this.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand.
Let's just stick with these words that we're using right now.
When you say below the line, that line is
the line, like the ideal price.
Okay.
In a perfect world.
For how
the
many you
ideal
have
price.
and how many people
Yes,
want it,
okay.
this is the price. Okay.
So, and that's only until the points intersect, right? Okay. What happens when you have a tariff is you are manipulating this economic graph, okay, this economic system. And when you do that, so you started with these, this kind of X where it intersects, you have clear lines, clear triangles and all this. When you include a tariff, what happens is you cut that off at a certain point. So first of all, assuming a free market, no longer are we at an ideal price point, right? That's the first thing. But by doing that, what you've created, you don't have a triangle anymore. You now have like a, what's it called? Like a rhombus. Or like, what's the one that's
trapezoid?
Yeah, the one that has two sides that are, anyway, it doesn't matter. This is
I have a feeling we're definitely going to get a comment on that.
I know. Sorry, Eric, for not knowing, or if that's something you care about. My point is, you don't have a triangle anymore, which means we don't have an even, you can't say whether we have an extra surplus for either side because of the uneven shape that you've created now. So what happens is you cut, oh my gosh, this is so difficult without showing you the graph, but I guess that's good because this is a podcast and people can't hear me anyway. So what winds up happening is you now have different lines, okay, that you can still see the consumer surplus and, I'm assuming people know how these graphs work, okay? I know, and people probably don't, which is making this more difficult, I'm realizing, but I'm just going to stop going into too much detail here. Long story short, when you include a tariff in this graph, it creates no longer a triangle. You have this weird square-shaped thing, okay? And when you have that, that means you have extra surplus for both sides, depending on where it falls on the line. But then, because it needs to be a triangle, right, in the middle, it needs to intersect and it needs to be a triangle, you wind up on the sides of the square, in order to make it a triangle, you wind up cutting off part of it. And you're like, well, that doesn't go to the consumer and it doesn't go to the producer. So what happens to it? It's lost. It's lost forever.
It goes to the government.
No. Because I did not explain this part well.
This is too much.
I know.
This is like, you're here explaining this to me, and I'm at least seeing the hand motions. I have no clue what we're talking about.
Let me try.
I mean, I'm waiting. I'm actually. You missed the part where you're like Kamala Harris saying how much you love charts.
I wish I do love charts. That's true. I wish I had, when we finally go to YouTube, I want a whiteboard so I can show all this stuff because that'd be useful.
Racist.
Let me explain very, very briefly. I'm just going to try to do this in like 15, 20 seconds to make it.
Okay.
If you don't understand what an economic chart is, none of this matters anyway, okay? So if you know what a supply and demand curve is, then you're with me at this point, okay?
Hold on. Hello. Echo.
Supply and demand curve, you have a surplus for the consumer, a surplus for the producer, depending where it falls on the line. You add a tariff, you have this weird square thing in the middle because you're manipulating the supply and demand curve, right? That box that you've created, once you cut the edges off, that box in the middle, that is government revenue.
Right.
Okay?
Right. That makes sense.
So I'm not talking about that box. I'm talking about the edges of that box that you have to cut off to create a triangle for the rest of the graph, right?
So instead
when
of
you cut
because
those off,
I understand what you're saying. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it makes no sense to me. Put it that way.
I know. That's why
because I don't understand the concept.
Just look up dead weight loss.
But what's the bottom line? What's the bottom line?
That when you add a tariff, that box, the majority of that box goes to revenue.
No, I'm saying I'm not even saying as far as the box. I'm saying what's the bottom? What is the bottom line?
The bottom line is majority of that box goes to government revenue.
You said box again.
Because I'm trying to finish the sentence. Okay. You cut off the edges of that. That is your dead weight loss.
Okay.
You are literally, because of you trying to manipulate the system to your advantage for whatever it is, this is literally just like...
So it's an artificial, by dead weight, it's basically an artificial cost that's been thrown in there that no one benefits. That the consumer...
It's loss for everyone.
Right.
Everybody loses because we're no longer at an efficient point.
So, and here's the funny thing. The only positive thing. And like I said, in general, I'm definitely free trade, right? I even hate to say positive, but the only benefit, I guess, indirect benefit I could see coming out of this, well, two things. Number one, should a country favor its own citizens, right?
Okay, no, that's what do you mean by that?
Well, in other words, and this would be an argument for a small tariff, right? If you had, let's say you had the United States and China.
No, but I just mean, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm making the point.
An example, but I just want a statement. What do you mean by that?
Should the
what do you mean by favor?
Should the United States give a slight edge to its own citizens?
To its citizens, meaning its producers?
Its producers, right? Its producers. So what I'm saying
here, you're suggesting that a tariff.
So what I'm saying, well, this is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, sure.
So you have the United States and China. Let's say, I don't know, computer chip. Let's say it could be produced in the United States or China, and the cost is exactly the same. The quality is exactly the same. Now I know that's not realistic.
No,
but
that's fine.
Just
I
for
love
the sake,
this example,
for the sake of argument,
I'm pretty sure
for the sake of argument,
an economic principle
would you
that
say,
you don't
well,
exist.
if there's a case where citizens in this country and companies in this country can produce a product, and the same in China, but the product, everything is exactly the same, shouldn't we prefer that we have people in this country, that we give them jobs as opposed to sending the money out of the country? Now, my only point is that would be an argument maybe for a small tariff.
Okay, so here's...
That's one argument. I have another argument too.
Okay, go ahead. What's your other argument?
Well, okay. The only other argument is it's around fiscal responsibility. And even if you say, nope, a tariff is a tax on the consumer, period, end of story. Even if that's what your contention is, it's kind of like, okay, well, we have a $37 trillion national debt. So we got to get the money somewhere. So basically it becomes like kind of like a national sales tax, right? So that would be the other argument in favor of some level of tariff, right?
And that's one of the main uses of tariffs is for revenue for your own country.
Right. And here's the thing. Now, the Trump administration or any administration that's going down this road might want to do this because probably half of the people, most likely Trump supporters, will not realize that it is, at least in part, a tax on them. Right?
Here's the thing. I think, though, the way that you're saying that is kind of misleading, and I just lost my train of thought. So it's difficult for me to continue the sentence. You see the issue.
That's why you're starting to get things.
I'm getting the
mail and email. Yes,
this is great.
Yes.
This is so great for me.
Yeah, and I don't want to get sidetracked.
It's misleading.
Okay,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Because my memory of when Trump was initially talking about the tariffs and what they would be good for and good for America and all this stuff, implying that they would be, and maybe even explicitly stating that it would help American businesses, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that argument...
Well, that argument what, though? Because if we're talking about tariffs on existing American companies, we've already agreed that in a lot of cases, the company, the producer, winds up taking a lot of the impact
you're talking about an American company that's producing their products. Let's take Apple. Apple's a good example. Are you saying that's an American company, but now they're producing all their phones overseas in China? Right?
Well, they've done that for a while.
Oh, I know. But my point is, so maybe instead of saying American company, we need to talk more about where the product's being manufactured, right? If you have Apple, that's a huge company, right? I think, again, it might be the most, or it's definitely one of the most, the biggest companies in the world. And they're doing very well, obviously, to be where they are.
Sure.
But who does it really benefit, right? It benefits the people sitting behind a desk. It benefits the executives. It benefits the shareholders, right? But if you're not a shareholder, now a lot of people have 401ks and all that, but a lot of people don't still.
I think we're getting a little off track
Well, my point is just the fact that Apple is the biggest company in the world isn't necessarily in itself say, well, we need to do everything to protect Apple because, who does it benefit is my point, right? If you have people that are looking to get up, go to work every day, and let's say these people are not people that are going to work in an office or people that are going to be the CEO or CFO.
This is very sidetracked right now.
Well, do you get what my point is? Do you understand my point?
But I don't think it's really.
I'm just saying. So what's more important is where the product is manufactured, right? And for something like a cell phone, it's maybe not as big of a deal. Maybe it is. I don't know. But when you're talking about steel, right? If you get most of your steel or all of your steel from outside of the country, and all of a sudden you're in a war.
Okay, no, see, here's why we can't do that though. And you were talking about this earlier after your first point, and this is what I was going to jump in with, because that's not a good argument, because what is the solution? That America just produces literally everything that we could possibly need just in case, or just so we could have a better trade situation.
No, not everything, but
a lot of things.
Well, the pandemic is a good example, right? Where we didn't produce. If you have zero pharmaceuticals produced in your own country, you're at risk. I mean, you can be manipulated very easily by other countries.
Here's the issue, though, and I think, obviously for something like pharmaceuticals or something like that, maybe you could make the argument that you should ignore economic principles and make something like that. In the case of a pandemic or whatever, that is maybe a good argument. But when you look at the advantages in economics, like comparative and absolute advantage and all that, that does not make sense. And so that's why we currently, and why, countries around the world trade, because of comparative advantage and absolute advantage.
Well, this goes back to, and like I said, in general, I'm all for free trade. I like free trade.
I know, but
for years and years, that's where I stood, right?
But so this is what we're talking about, because you can't on one hand say America should produce things that we need and we should protect ourselves against, unfair trade and in the case of emergencies and all this, and then also say, well, yeah, but it's good to trade with other countries, because you can't.
Well, it's the thing. Is it an absolute? That's the thing. Is it an absolute that it's either all this way or all this one way or all the other?
Well, no, but what we're talking about, because so like what comparative advantage and absolute advantage are in economics.
In general, I'm sure I do, and when you explain it, I will know for sure.
Okay. Here, let me. This is not going to be as
do I know the specific definition? I know the concepts. Put it that way.
Okay, so comparative advantage is the ability to produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost than a competitor, right? So, you had kind of started talking about this before. That's why I interrupted you for a second, because you pretty much said this without calling it a comparative advantage when you were talking about trading with China or whatever you were talking about.
And China would have, in a lot of cases, a comparative advantage, right?
In some, in some
because we don't have a lot of Chinese children over here who can cheaply produce the products for us. I'm just saying, if we have chip manufacturers, adults, their fingers are too big.
This is that's funny, but you're making this difficult to understand now, because you've interrupted my very succinct explanation of comparative versus absolute advantage. Whereas an absolute advantage refers to the ability of a country or whatever, an individual, a company, to produce more of a good or service than a competitor using the same amount of resources, right? The reason countries trade...
So more efficient, more productive, in other words?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So that's absolute advantage. I just want to make sure I understand. So again, contrast that with comparative advantage.
Well, absolute advantage is just you can produce more. You're more efficient. You can produce more with the same, literally all the same inputs. But you just do it better.
Same number of employees, same
everything.
Raw materials. Okay.
Yes. Whereas comparative advantage, you're producing more and sacrificing, or maybe not producing more because absolute advantage is producing more, but you're able to produce goods while sacrificing less than other countries. You know what I mean? Because that's what an opportunity cost is. And I'm not an opportunity cost.
Okay.
You have the decision. Today, I can wake up and I can either, I can sew 5 shirts, or I can, what's something else I can do?
Sew 5 pairs of pants.
Sure. Yeah,
I don't
even
know.
though that's going to be confusing. No,
Okay.
I can sew 5 shirts, or I can make 10 basketballs. Those are my options for the day.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So a comparative, so then let's also say, though, let's say that China can make, hold on, let me think of
it's very impersonal. We refer to China as one giant person.
China can do,
the collective group of China.
What did I say? U.S. can do 10 basketballs and sew 5 shirts, whereas China, let's say it's the opposite. They can, given the same amount of time, they can sew 10 shirts, but only make 5 basketballs.
Because of their nimble little children.
Stop. It's not okay. Child labor is not okay.
Well,
anyway.
okay. But so let's flip that. It's not okay, right? So one of the arguments for tariffs is not so much just from an economic standpoint, but from a social standpoint, to say, like,
even let me finish
we're
my
putting
example.
I thought you were finished. Okay,
so that's comparative advantage. So it obviously makes more sense that if that's in the same 8 hours, what does it make sense to do?
Basketballs or shirts.
Who should make basketballs and who should sew shirts?
The ones that are better at each one.
So in the example that I just gave, because you were listening.
Right, yes. It would be the Chinese are better.
Should do what?
Should do the shirts.
Okay, anyway, yes, because they could do 10 in the same amount that we could do 5.
I had a 50-50 shot.
That's a comparative advantage, and we should make basketballs.
Right.
We should make all the basketballs.
Right.
They should make all the shirts, because that's a comparative advantage.
Right. In other words, the concept that some people are better at one thing, some people are better than another. So why not have? And this is all.
I'm still talking.
No, this is all a free trade argument. But we're in agreement.
Whereas the absolute advantage, I'm just trying to make sure all the listeners, the 2 that are still here, understand.
Oh, the others are there. They're just asleep.
Wake up. An absolute advantage is, let's say, both the U.S. and China can make 10 basketballs and 10 shirts. But we can all do the same thing.
Okay.
But whereas it takes the U.S. 8 hours to make those, it takes China 4 hours to make those.
Okay.
So China now has an absolute advantage in that stuff.
So in that case, if China can do it in the same amount of time, but they can do it more cheaply, they still have an absolute advantage.
No. It's all the same. It's all the same.
You use the example of time.
It's just
but time translates into cost is my point. Okay.
Time is money.
Yes, exactly. So going back to the whole Trump thing and the tariffs thing, if they were doing this. Go ahead. I don't think I'll forget.
No, I was just going to say the other thing with comparative advantage, though, is this is important because this is what we're talking about.
Go ahead.
It's not just like items like that and inputs. It's also there are some countries that specialize in things and have a comparative advantage in things because they have like the natural resources.
Right.
Whereas
Children.
we do not. Stop. Would you stop making a joke of child labor? It's not a joke and it's a serious thing. And it's anyway, like. Oh my gosh. Like oil, right?
Yeah.
What?
No. Finish your statement.
Where does most of the oil in the world come from?
Well, I mean, the Middle East, there's a lot of oil, but there's a lot of oil.
Why, though?
I don't know. It's just where...
You just said it. Because that's where
it is.
That's where the oil is, right? Okay. What?
Right. But the U.S. actually does have large... When it comes to oil and natural gas, we do have a lot. That's all I was going to say. But anyway,
if the argument is who has a comparative advantage in oil, it's countries in the Middle East.
Right.
Okay. What? Go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say was, though, I think with the whole tariff argument, right? And if the plan was to use them, in my opinion, the right way.
Which is what?
Well, to try to negotiate better deals and to try to, like in cases, Because everyone, okay, I shouldn't say everyone. Most people like the idea of free trade. But the issue is, if I say, well, I'm going to put no tariff on you and you're going to put no tariff on me, and China says, because China it speaks with one voice, China says, okay, we're fine. We're going to do that. No tariffs, right? But then China has child labor. China has, their environmental regulations are extremely lax. Let's say they have an 80-hour work week. Now, certain things you might be like, well, that's their prerogative, I guess, and we have to compete with that. But other things clearly are not fair, right? Maybe, for instance, if China says, okay, any products coming into our country or specific product has to go through this battery of tests, which their internal products, the same product, doesn't have to go through that same battery of tests. That creates like an artificial barrier, right? That makes it very hard to sell products into that country. So in that case, a tariff to basically level the playing field would be warranted.
Okay, so are you talking about companies in America that already exist, or are you talking about, something that we get from a different country that we don't make here, and it's like, well, we should do that here?
I'm saying, I'm trying to think.
Are you talking about existing or companies that don't exist yet?
It could be either one.
It's
not relative.
Because here's the thing.
Go ahead.
Companies that, and maybe not in every case, I'm going to make a general statement here.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion as an economist, is that the reason there's some industries that either have a very low presence in America, like in the United States, or that just straight don't exist in the United States, is because of advantages. It does not, there are some industries that it will never make sense to produce here.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not disagreeing.
Then, so if you take something that we're getting from another country and you put a tariff on it, when we're not able to make it here efficiently,
I'm not talking about that.
Okay, well, that's what I'm asking you. What
no, I'm talking about let's say, for instance, a clothing manufacturer. Let's say there's a company in the United States that produces shirts. There's a company in China. So let's say we're importing shirts. Somebody's going on Amazon and they're like, oh, I like that shirt. I'm going to get that shirt, right? So they look at the price. It's whatever, $30. And they order the shirt. Okay. Now let's say in China, somebody goes on and the shirt from the United States cost $60, the equivalent of $60. Okay. Now, let's just say, for the sake of argument, the production costs are exactly the same, right? But let's say to sell the shirt into China, China has regulations that say you have to have a certain thread count and number of stitches and some kind of crazy stuff, but only for imported shirts. Okay? So my point is, then in that case, they're manipulating the game. They're making it inherently difficult. I know
they are. And what is the result of that if you keep those tariffs in place?
Then we can't sell it. You'll never be able to sell shirts into China. You'll never be able to do it because you will not be able to compete internally in China. So I'm using an example saying that if my point is, and it can be either way, it can be either country. If a country has regulations that differ for imported products, okay, then that's the equivalent of a tariff. It's the same.
Are you arguing for or against this?
For or against?
Having different regulations for imports than you do for
I'm against it. I'm against it.
The way that you were talking about it sounded like you
were. No. What I'm saying is, no. I'm definitely not in favor of that. But my point is that would create a justification for a tariff to say, well, if you're going to do that to shirts that we try to sell into your country, we're going to add a tariff for shirts from China. We're going to add a $30 tariff.
I understand. So your point is,
we're trying to make the playing field level.
You're saying that China's already doing this to us. And so it's only, I'm
saying they may be in some cases. I'm not saying they're automatically doing that. I'm making a general argument.
I can't argue against opinion. I can only argue fact.
I'm making a general argument where my point is, a tariff is not the only way that prices can be raised for
fine,
a company.
But then, and this is maybe a larger conversation, and we should wrap this up.
Yeah.
But so you are for or against the tariffs against China currently?
I honestly, I don't. Well, first of all, okay, right now they're at 30%, right? So in other words,
right now
we got in this thing where we said it was going to be 100. I forget what number, some high number, and then China raised it, and then we raised
or
it.
Against?
As of right now, I don't know enough.
Well, then why are we doing a podcast on tariffs that you wanted to have
in general,
if you don't know enough about the
in
subject?
general, you're talking
Absurd.
about it. It's not that simple. It's not that simple because right now there's a 30% tariff, right? And it's for the most part across the board, but it's not because I think there are a lot of products that are excluded. You would have to look at every product. It's complicated. You would have to look at every product and say, okay, for clothing,
I understand.
This is what you're doing.
So this is examples.
So here, and I know we need to wrap this up. Here's the thing that's frustrating to me. Republicans in general were always free trade, right? Always anti-tariff. Okay. Now all of a sudden, Republicans are okay with tariffs. And I think Democrats were the other way around, right?
I mean, yeah, you can. Parties change throughout the years.
But
they flip flop, and
yeah, and the parties can do that. What bothers me is the people in that party just go along with it because people are not informed at all, right? And all they do is they watch their channel, they get their news, and they just believe it, right?
And this is now This is no longer tariffs anyway.
Anyway, so in general, and really it's more about free trade than tariffs, right? Or it's a combination of the two.
Sure.
So free trade, great. But some products, we need to make sure we have at least a small percent. God forbid if there's World War IV. Well, I think we already are in the process of 3, whatever. No, God forbid if that happens. There are certain things that we need to be able to produce. That's all.
Like steel, which is the example that you used earlier. Yeah. That conveniently, Google, when I am searching dead weight loss right now and tariffs, this is the specific example it comes up with. So this will be a lovely way to end.
That's good.
Imagine a tariff on imported steel, as you said earlier. This could lead to higher prices for steel, reducing the demand for steel, and potentially benefiting domestic steel producers. However, that's not where it ends, because the overall effect would be a loss of economic efficiency as consumers would have to pay more for steel, and some transactions that would have been beneficial to both buyers and sellers would not take place. So with tariffs, there's a net loss surplus for the economy, and there's, in general, like a misallocation of resources. It just...
It manipulates the game.
You're hurting yourself. You may get, like I said, and like you had said, if you're using it as more of like a tool to get better deals or better whatever relationships and all that, that's one thing. But the actual tariff itself is, in one way or another, even if it's not the consumer specifically that's seeing an increased price, it's still hurting the imported country, the people of the imported country.
Like I said, I agree in general the free trade principle, but I guess the flip side is, are you okay with, $1 trillion trade deficit annually with China? Like, is that okay? I mean, because we have $1 trillion a year leaving the country. Because to me, if we were...
No, we're not arguing anymore. We're done.
Okay.
Goodbye. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay. We're going to have to pick this up later. Not specifically on that, but yeah. Okay. Goodbye.
I don't have time for this.
Well, I'm not going to stop it.
All right.
I think we need outtakes.
We don't.
Oh, no. We don't. Outtakes don't have to even be a thing,
Outtakes.
There's no reason.
Outtakes.
Okay.
Maybe we should have an outtakes intro. No, that doesn't make any sense.
I think that defeats the purpose of outtakes. Outtakes then become a part of the show, and it's not.
The outtakes are a part of the show. What do you mean? Every time you go, we need outtakes.
Good night.
And you start recording. That's you saying.
Good day, everyone.
The outtakes are a part of the show.
Remember to keep looking up.
You know what? Are you still? You're still recording? Okay.
Yes,
good.
I keep going. I'm going to hit stop, but you keep talking.
We should.
Go ahead.
We should have like something that we say at the end of the episode, at the end of every episode, like a positive, uplifting, like have the day you deserve.
Yeah, that would be good. That's what we'll do.
All right, listeners, have the day you deserve.
Karen.
No, it's supposed to be positive.
Karen.
Yeah, but also that's the whole point. That's like my favorite saying. Have the day you deserve is if you're a good person, you'll have a good day. And if you're not, you won't. And that's all I hope for you.
All right, I feel bad for people that their actual name is Karen, though. They probably never have a good day.
Karens?
Yeah, because people always assume that they're
Karen,
I feel like if don't you feel like if your name was Karen, you would have to be extra nice because now you'd have to overcome that?
Yes.
Goodbye.